Hi, everyone. It's Joe Veneri, the host of Fit Insider, the show where I talk with the entrepreneurs, executives, and investors who are redefining the business of fitness and wellness. Today, I'm joined by Gilad Jacobs. Gilad is the founder of NormaTec, a leader in recovery and compression technology. NormaTec was recently acquired by Hyperice, where Gilad will serve as the Chief Innovation Officer. In this episode, we talked about how NormaTec got its start, how the Hyperice partnership came together, and the role data and personalization will play in the future of performance. Let's get into it. Gilad, welcome to Fit Insider. Thanks for joining us.
How's it going, Joe?
Doing well. I appreciate you making time. Excited to talk here. And just setting the stage, giving listeners a little bit of background. You were the founder at NormaTec Recovery, obviously focused on recovery and compression technology. And then NormaTec was acquired by Hyperice. And now you're transitioning into the role as Chief Innovation Officer. So, can you unpack that a little bit? Tell us about your time at NormaTec and how you navigated growth there. And then obviously we'll get into how the acquisition came about.
For sure. So it's actually been quite the journey and story, both personally and professionally. So my late mom was our founder on the medical side of the business. She was a PhD bioengineer, and she also had an MD in rehab medicine. So she would take care of patients as chief of rehab at huge hospitals coming back from stroke and injury and surgeries and everything else. And she started seeing these women after breast cancer surgery that had swelling, something called lymphedema, which is a lymphatic channel issue where you can't evacuate the lymph fluid, and it would pool up in your arm, sometimes 2-3 times the size of a normal arm. And she would say, well, did you talk to your primary care physician? And they would say, yeah, well, I didn't do the surgery. Go talk to your surgeon. So they'd march down the hall, talk to the surgeon. The surgeon said, I cured you of cancer. You're not going to die. Who cares if you have a swollen arm? Go talk to rehab. My mom was sitting there going, well, I have no one to throw them to. I mean, it's either rehab or the parking lot. So she started looking around at things that would enhance fluid movement in the body. That's really how this whole thing got started. And this was back in the mid to late 90s. And she looked around, realized there was no prescription that she could prescribe, no pill that would take care of this. You could do a diuretic, it would kick the kidneys, but not really kind of focused on one area. And there was no surgery because we're talking about a very micro vessel. It's, as small as stents are, they're still really big in terms of, getting put in a blocked artery on the micro scale. And so surgery wasn't an option. So this idea of external compression made sense. And we've been mummifying people for, 5,000 years. And wrapping in one form or another. And she was intrigued by that concept. So she actually went around to all the compression companies that were out there, and some of them still persist and some of them kind of come and gone over the years. But this technology of air compression has been around since the 60s. And she said, let me help you guys make a better mousetrap. And they looked at her and they said, you're just a woman. What do you know about business? Give us, some of your medical ideas and hit the road. And I remember the day she came home. It was a Friday night. And she said, they're messing with the wrong broad. I think she may have used some slightly different language back then. And she said, we have to figure out a better way to increase circulation in the body. So how are we going to do that? And it was her background and ability and brilliance at that moment to kind of fuse together the physiological principles of how a healthy body moves fluid and put that into something that is very easy to use. So when we got started, it was exclusively a medical device to help patients with poor circulation. And that's kind of how we got started. So we were doing all kinds of stuff with women after breast cancer surgery and diabetics with wounds on their legs that don't heal because of bad circulation. Some really gnarly stuff that you would see. We all have had grandmas and grandpas sedentary in a wheelchair, and swollen ankles that kind of cascade over their, shoes and stuff. And we all look at that and go, oh, that's got to suck. And that's, hopefully not on my agenda, as I get older. But as we got going, she said to me, you'll always have a job here, but if it's a career you want, nepotism stops with the opportunity. So after I looked up the word nepotism and realized what that was coming out of college, I realized I was going to have to work a little bit harder than the average bear. And I saw this kind of need in sports, and I was always kind of into sports. And I said, maybe there's an application. So we took 2 machines and $5,000. That's all we had back then to kind of dive into this new venture. She said, it's not my juice. There's 2 machines and $5,000, go see what you can do. And at first I positioned it as a rehab tool, or modality is what they call it, to increase circulation after an injury or surgery. So you go down, you have an ACL repair, post-op, you have an ankle sprain on the court, football contusion, helmet from a football, injury. You're going to put this on, increase circulation, help the athlete get back to normal in what we call now rehab applications. And we started to kind of get a little pickup here and there. I went to a couple of shows and everything else. And what started to hit, which was really interesting, is that teams that bought a handful of them for the training room to deal with athletes with injuries started picking up more and more. So University of Florida, which was one of the first teams that we ever got going, called us up. And this was back in 2006, 2007, just as we were getting going here. And they were winning all these back-to-back basketball championships and football national championships and titles. And it was kind of the team. They're always a perennial powerhouse, but they were really the team back in the mid 2000s. And they said, we need more NormaTecs for basketball. And I said, well, you already have two. How many ankle sprains are you guys dealing with? And that's when the light bulb kind of aha moment happened, when they said, no, we're using it on injuries, we're using it post-op, but we're using it now on what we call now fresh legs faster. So if we can increase circulation when there's a problem, when you have a healthy athlete and they're just trying to get their legs back underneath them, how easy would it be to increase that kind of fluid in the body? And what can we do to maximize performance? And then everything kind of came into focus. And it was a long kind of road. The equipment, the technology wasn't kind of where it is today by any means. The price points were much higher, and we didn't really have any scientific literature and background and research on the technology in the sports world. And we didn't really have many people using it. But after a while, it started to catch fire. And we count ourselves as kind of the go-to recovery tool of athletes the world over.
That's such an incredible story to hear about, how it came about and then took off. Digging in a little bit, there was the moment of like everything's building and, your mom kind of pioneering this technology, and then you seeing the application in sports. And then now obviously it's looking back and it seems like so logical and all the pieces fell into place.
It always is, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. So if you could, and if maybe you can pinpoint it, or even, just like a certain turning point where, you talked about the University of Florida and the sports application. When were you able to say, this isn't maybe something we're trying out, this isn't an idea we're figuring out, and it transitioned into, okay, this is a business, and now we have to figure out, if you want to call it product market fit, or where we fit into the broader landscape to be able to really, focus in and then grow this thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I like to use the term inflection point, throughout the storyline and trajectory, kind of what have been those, moments that really you look back on and say, wow, either I knew it at the time or I didn't know it at the time, but I should have known at the time this was an important moment. So we have, a handful of them, again, hindsight being 2020. But in the beginning, like you were mentioning, when we got started, we couldn't give these away. Like I couldn't get callbacks from people. I was literally showing up at the Dallas Cowboys, knocking on the door and saying, hey, I want to meet with your athletic training staff, and holding this thing that looked like I put it together in my basement, the night before. And, no personal connections, no one vouching for us. So I think there was a little bit of a groundswell that started to happen at the pro level. And in the beginning, once the pros have access to anything they want. And I call that world the double M, or the means and the motivation, right? They have the motivation to perform at the highest level, and the means to procure and implement any kind of technology under the sun. Money is no factor for them and the teams, really. And once we got a handful of NBA and NFL teams, there was this kind of organic groundswell where the athletic trainers would be talking to each other in that brotherhood and camaraderie of, what are you guys using? And in the beginning, the pro athletes, usually the older guys on the team who were trying to extend their careers another season or two, get that last contract, make that money, and avoid injury, they were kind of the early adopters on that front. And what we started to see was the pro athletes would call it their secret recovery weapon. Because up until we came along, and it's interesting, you talk about the Hyperice trajectory as well, and it really kind of paralleled us. We kind of came into this around the same time, right? Late 2010s, early 2011, 12, that kind of thing. But as we kind of got going here, it was with this secret thing where people were like, I don't want to tell people I'm using it. And I don't really know where to use it because I would use it in the training room and maybe coach would think that I'm still injured and that's bad juju. Or I'd be next to a guy rehabbing a knee, and he's got bloody gauze all over the place and I don't want to be next to that. So maybe I'd grab it and take it home or, use it in a back room somewhere. There wasn't a protocol behind it. So that was kind of one thing that started to happen, is that there was this organic kind of uptick of athletes picking this up and using it, getting that experience and really enjoying it. And that, I think, for us allowed us to say, maybe we are onto something here. More and more guys would hear about it. And I would say someone, calling up with their Amex Black Card who's trying to buy a couple, had to hear about it. It's like, oh, my guy on this other team, he told me I need to get this. So, just put it on the card and send it off to me. So that was one kind of cool moment. I think the other cool moment was back in I want to say 14, mid 2014, the first NormaTec Recovery room went live. So the concept here was all of these pro teams were using it for rehab and for recovery, but kind of on the down low, the athletes were using it, but they wanted to put some protocols and some structure in place. And what they ended up doing is we had this really wonderful, and we still do, great relationship with the then St. Louis Rams, now obviously the LA Rams. And Reggie Scott, their head athletic trainer, and I have been buds for a while. And we started kind of talking about this concept of maybe a location, a resource for these athletes to use outside the training room. Obviously, that's where they go when they're injured. A locker room is where they go to get changed and showered. And where else are we going to go to kind of get your legs right? Well, if it wasn't an ice tub or a massage, which still exists, and obviously people enjoy those from time to time, what else can we be doing? And what we ended up doing was putting together this room, the St. Louis Rams, again, back then, recovery room powered by NormaTec. We had a whole bunch of NormaTecs, and we had no idea what we were about to uncover. But it turns out there was so much interest and such high utilization that it became this must-have tool where we have a majority of NBA, NFL teams have implemented these. We're talking best NCAA programs in the world. We have about 30 to 40 branded NormaTec recovery rooms all over the world, with more and more coming online, every week or two. So it's really, really intriguing stuff. But the idea behind it being the pros latched onto it, and then they started to implement it amongst their ranks. And then it started to kind of flow down to the everyday person, is what we're starting to see now.
You tapped right into that. Obviously, the need was there, the product was there, but then it was that word of mouth kind of marketing that, as people started to uncover the advantage, they wanted to keep it to themselves, but also tell their teammates, and then word got out. So it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, for sure. And around that time, we were also constantly innovating. And that's one thing that I think was a reflection that we saw in Hyperice and they saw in us, as we started to kind of talk about the mechanics behind this acquisition, that we don't sit back on our laurels. We are really pushing the pace constantly and not just readapting something that's already existed for a different application, as a lot of technologies sometimes do, but we're constantly innovating, creating, listening to our customer, listening to the athlete, working with everyone from the athlete to the athletic trainer to the strength coach, and figuring out what is going to really work best for the majority of the population.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to dig into. Obviously, we had Jim Heather, the CEO of Hyperice, on the podcast, and his story, the story of Hyperice, sounds very similar. So it makes sense as to where the partnership and the acquisition ultimately comes from. But can you pull back the curtain a little bit? I know, obviously, being in the same space, the companies, the people, the talent knew each other. We're working towards a similar goal. But when did you guys start talking about the idea of the acquisition, and what does that look like going forward?
Yeah, it happened fast. It happened actually really quickly, which, in this day and age with everything that's going on in the world, I guess is a blessing, and also kind of allowed us to cut through the bullshit. When we got going on stuff, one of the things we promised ourselves jointly from the outset is that we were always going to be upfront and open with each other. And in fact, as the lawyers started digging in on, the normal lawyer stuff that they would have questions about, instead of them negotiating on stuff as it's typically done, they would throw it back to their respective teams. And then I'd call Jim at night, and the time zones, them being on the West Coast in California and us being right outside Boston on the East Coast, was definitely in their favor, as I'd be for months on the phone at 12, 1, 2 a.m. kind of knocking things out, but it was obviously well worth it. We got this whole thing started because Hyperice's founder, Anthony Katz, and I have been friends for close to 5 years. And we met at a show, and then we started seeing each other at another show. And I'd go into an NBA team and see Hyperice stuff. He'd go into an NBA team and see NormaTec stuff. And we kind of just started, sometimes it's lonely at the top, and, talking to someone who's in your shoes from an HR perspective and, innovation perspective, manufacturing perspective. We worked off of each other as a sounding board and just kind of hit it off from a friendship perspective. And the conversations were much more at ease and fluid that way. But we really started talking about this, I think, probably October of last year. And it was probably late October. So we're talking like 4.5 months from start to close, which is phenomenally fast for, a deal of this kind.
Wow. Yeah. And those conversations, I think it's interesting to note, like you said, the relationship there, making it, lawyers are going to do what lawyers do, but the fact that you guys were able to come back together and kind of, cut through the nonsense and get right down to, ultimately it sounds like we want to make this work. What do we need to do and be upfront in order to make it work? And exciting stuff that it came together.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's exactly what it was. And one of my business mentors who also was a NormaTec investor, I called him up, and, he'd been on Wall Street for the last 30, 40 years, and he's seen these deals come and go, more times than he probably even remembers. And I said, his name's Joel. I said, Joel, what's going to make or break this? And he said, what makes or break this is the top guys, right? Top individuals on each team. If they trust each other and they can work together and they believe in each other and they both have a common goal, it's going to go through. It's where one goes off the reservation, or if there's, ulterior motives that aren't, talked about in advance. And, that was definitely a guiding, a kind of a guidepost for us to kind of execute quickly. And, everything flowed together. Like you said, Anthony and I have been friends. Jim's freaking fantastic. Love the man. Such a great leader. Picked up on that, immediately as I started to dive in. I'd known him for a few years from shows and talking on the phone from some collaborations, but really through this process, getting to know him, and super brilliant guy. Really on top of his game 24/7. I mean, you get emails from the man. I don't know when he sleeps, but he's always working. And then as you meet the rest of the team and kind of go down the line, there were just so many synergies. Them being on the West Coast, us being on the East Coast, the complements that we had in different markets. They were very, very strong in certain areas. We were very, very strong in certain areas, and it just made sense. It wasn't like, we were both super heavy in running and didn't do anything in the NFL. Right. So that kind of made a lot of sense to kind of supercharge and hypercharge, if you will, all of the efforts and the relationships and bringing those together. And that's one of the things now that I think we're so pleased by, that not only that came together fast and in a cohesive fashion, but with everything kind of pivoting to home fitness these days, and all of the craziness of the COVID world, being able to tap into our really great Rolodex of relationships that we have has been super helpful, navigating this little bit of a crazy period.
And those relationships, the synergies, obviously the speed at which things came together, all of that is important now as you're transitioning into the Chief Innovation Officer role. I'm sure that's still developing all the time, but give us a sense of what that looks like and what you're working on.
Yeah. So the first things first is a fusing of the two entities, right? Because you got to get got to set the ship right. That happened very quickly, and it's constantly evolving, and we're constantly tweaking some things. But both teams were extraordinarily motivated to start working together. We trust each other. We've done, even before the acquisition was official, or even before we started talking about the possible acquisition, we had been collaborating for years. There would be events at CrossFit Games, and we'd go in and we would have a recovery, zone for the athletes that we would create from a NormaTec and a Hyperice, product offering. We've done a lot of stuff at Nike together. So the dynamics and mechanics of working together were there. And I think that it allowed kind of the teams, once we told our respective teams of what was happening, it was like, oh yeah. And in fact, there were a handful of people that, as I started to tell them, they said, wait, don't tell me. Let me guess. Hyperice is acquiring us, right? It just made a ton of sense. And as you start, again, looking at all the complements and the synergies that are involved, it really was this match made in heaven, and we couldn't be happier.
That's incredible. Yeah. And just zooming out a little bit, we've talked a little bit about the technology, how it came to be, and now thinking about all the work that you all were doing. And obviously in sports, it makes a lot of sense, but now it's starting to tip over, I think, into almost everyday life when you think about recovery and self optimization. Really, everybody from, yes, athletes, but even kind of your average Joes and office workers are wanting to get into this. How do I make myself better? How do I move more effectively? And how do I just feel better? And we've had a number of folks from the kind of category on the podcast, whether it's Will Ahmed from Whoop, Scott Marcascio from Myo Detox, had a chance to talk to Matteo Franceschetti from 8 Sleep, thinking about the evolution of this broader industry. Where do you think it's going and what are you excited about?
Yeah, it's a phenomenally exciting time right now on so many different levels. I think back in the day, and when I say back in the day, you even look back, 90s and 80s and 70s, not even that long ago, the people that were really training, getting after it were the professionals or college, high school teams, that kind of stuff. And then you would have the random guy in the neighborhood that oh, there's Joe, he's running again, rain or shine, he's running. And we've started to, as kind of out of shape and poor diet, and we're constantly seeing those headlines, obviously, in the news about how challenging it is for Americans as a whole, and the obesity epidemic and everything else. I think at the same time, we flip it around. We have some very hardcore, diligent individuals that are getting after it day in and day out. And even those that, I think for a great example is Whoop and the Fitbits and the Garmins of the world, being able, Apple Watches, being able to put this stuff together and allow access to certain technologies for the masses and allow them to incorporate it into their daily routines and their regimens has really been a great equalizer. And I think same thing, as technology becomes more and more utilized and the price, the cost, the barrier of entry to access that technology has come down. When we first got started, NormaTec was over $5,000 per machine and 2 boots. Right now, with some of the great opportunities in conjunction with Hyperice, we're talking $995 for the machine and 2 boots right now from a NormaTec perspective, with so much more tech packed in there. So I think looking at how people are accessing workouts and the fact that maybe you don't have to go to the YMCA and play basketball on a Sunday morning to get a good workout, that especially now with what's going on, that gyms are closed, right? You can't buy a set of dumbbells, online right now, unless you're willing to spend like $1,500 on eBay, which I still think some people are. People are tapped out. They're looking for ways, creative outlets to kind of get their workouts in. And I think between all of these tools that we can kind of provide and help guide with, that started kind of trickle down from the pros, they've decoded how to use it, allowed us to make the product even that much better. And now the general consumer is able to not only access that, but really enjoy the fruits of all, the labors that our engineers and staff have put in, but also the pros have, done the trial and error on for years.
Yeah, I think as you were describing, I was that guy, right? Played college football, was into triathlon and endurance sports. I was always, I knew about NormaTec, I feel like ages ago, and was always trying to do something to have that advantage and recover faster, as part of my lifestyle. And of course, you have people like that, the weekend warrior. You have folks who are professional athletes and can build an incredible business on that. And going forward, is it kind of necessary to break into that other side of the market that is the everyday, more casual consumer, or are you guys just kind of laser focused at let's focus on the professional athletes, let's focus on the weekend warriors, and maybe at some point it kind of trickles down even further?
Yeah, it's a good question. Specifically to answer that, the answer is, obviously we're very intrigued by it. Both organizations historically, getting together with Anthony and over the years and talking to him about it, there was early on, at least, the conversation, well, do we keep this as kind of the untouchable technology that the best in the world use? And we just blast it off. There are some technologies that are like that. You go into the Olympic Training Center and you see stuff that you won't see in any other gym. But for us, it wasn't about the money as much as it was the impact. So if we could have the greatest impact on the largest number of people, and I think that was something in the ethos of NormaTec when we got started that my mom kind of really talked about very often, which was how do we help the most people in the most effective way? And even though we're not solely focused on diabetic wounds anymore, although we still have a robust side of the business that's doing that, rebranded now as Hyperice Human Health, and we're very excited about that. The concept of allowing more people to access this who are interested, both from a price point perspective, lowering that, both from an education perspective, the time has never been more ripe. And the other cool thing is if you look at you take any sport, you take triathlon, you're talking about football, it doesn't matter what sport, and some of them are a little bit more dialed in on this concept, but here's the analogy, right? Every single sport has tried to improve performance, typically through one of four ways historically. The first one was a coach, right? Hoosiers, 1950s. Man, if we get the right coach, we're going to go to the championship this year. Then as we moved on, we realized, well, it's not just about the coach. Coaching is very important, but it's got to be about the training. So how can we train more efficiently? Back in the day, we're just going to run laps until people drop. Well, we're much more dialed in now with strength to cardio to flexibility to yoga, what we're doing, how we're doing, not overtraining. We've decoded and uncoded that in a big way over the years. Then it moved from training to nutrition. Back in 10 years ago, you say to someone, you're doing the Boston Marathon tomorrow. What are you doing tonight? Man, I'm doing a big carbo load, huge pasta dinner. Then I'll have a little water, maybe a quick Gatorade on the run, and I'll be good. You couldn't be competitive if you tried that today. And two, you'd be shooting yourself in the foot and people would laugh at you. We understand the protein, the fats, the carbs ratios, and when to kind of titrate what and how, and how your body responds and everything else. And then the last one was gear. Can we use gear? And obviously triathlon as an example, it's much more gear intensive where you're trying to shave ounces off a bike every year and more aerodynamic than, let's say, basketball with the latest, Jordan shoes to make you jump even higher, LeBron's. But the concept there is gear as that fourth pillar. And now in comes recovery, because legally people are constantly looking for that innovative way. And up until now it was massage or ice bath, or, you kind of take a day off. We're very passive about our recovery. Now we're very proactive. The pros have kind of allowed us to understand that you have to be proactive about something if you want it to make the biggest impact. So this idea of just taking a day off and relaxing, as I'm sure, you experienced in college or even in triathlon back in the day, it was, well, I'm just going to take a rest day. Well, a rest day is good, right? And needed, but what else are you doing, right? Even if you're working out 6 hours a day, you still have 18 hours in a given day. Sleep is very important. Nutrition obviously is a must, but you have so much time that you're not actually focusing on, either a skill workout or cardio or strength workout to be able to kind of optimize your performance. And recovery is this thing. And one of the cool things that I think NormaTec and Hyperice both have in our technology with Hyperice vibration and percussion technology and all the great stuff that NormaTec does on the compression side is the fact that not only is it very effective, both scientifically and anecdotally, and both of those things really need to work. Because if I showed you something and I said scientifically it works, but you feel like crap while you're doing it, it's not going to have the same usage factor as some other things. But that's one important component. The other important component from a utilization perspective is that it feels good while you're in it. So more people are using it as kind of a downtime thing. Throw on the boots. We call it the double play here at the Jacobs house. My wonderful wife, who's very pregnant right now, puts the boots on at night, and I'm hypervolting her upper back. I get in my brownie points for giving her a massage, and it's less wear and tear on my hands, and she's feeling great, and she pops out, and life is good.
I think that's an important point there, is that, recovery as this vertical that now goes into the whole kind of performance equation, and that's recovery beyond just taking a day off. We have the tracking the data, you have sleep, you have, heart rate variability, all these things that are starting to emerge that are giving us a more clear picture of, what recovery means and how it affects performance. Is there something you look at in terms of, what's emerging or what's next in the recovery space that is worth paying attention to, maybe as a listener, or even something that Hyperice is pursuing in terms of like the next emerging vertical?
Yeah, it's a great thing. We talk about it a lot, and obviously in all interviews and industry contacts that I have that are constantly peppering me with questions with stuff. So officially, the line is that we don't really disclose or talk about things that are in development, although we're constantly tinkering. But I think the ultimate here is knowing And this is where all this is driving towards, right? You talk about Will, who's a good buddy of mine at Whoop, and all the other technologies about knowing what's going on in your body in a more ongoing kind of way where you can slice and dice that information to your advantage. Before, back in the 80s and 90s, it was all about what? Heart rate, right? I got my polar heart rate monitor. I'm golden. I'm going to try to train within this zone. I want to go too high. I don't want to go too low. I remember when I got started, I was a personal trainer coming out of high school for a year. And the big equation was 220 minus your age is your max heart rate, right? That was like the thing to talk about, that and a Smith machine. Showing you my age at this point, were the two things that you had to talk about with your clients. And what we're realizing is with more technology being on your wrist, right? Whether it's Whoop, whether it's an Apple Watch, whether it's understanding what's going on with your sleep, being able to kind of deliver to your body something that's more customized than just rule of thumb for somebody who's done, your type of workout. But even within workouts, your body's going to respond differently depending on the environment, depending on the day, how much sleep you've had, nutrition, how you're feeling. Are you about to get sick? Are you coming out of getting sick? So being able to kind of adapt, and I think that's the ultimate. I know we've been talking about as an industry for a while, having sensors on different parts of the body. In clothing, I still think, there's a lot of technology that's there, but a lot more that needs to be developed until it's kind of more mainstream. But I think a lot of these wearables on the wrist, or in other parts of the body that are kind of out there and are able to give data. I think it's not only collecting that data, but then it's being able to figure out how to kind of really utilize it. And, we're really excited, all the things that we're working on in the digital tech side of stuff. We have some stuff that's going to be dropping later this year that's going to just fundamentally revolutionize the digital tech side of the industry. And we're super pumped about that.
Yeah, I totally understand. You can't divulge too much. But
I had the job for 2 months, man. I can't get fired. Right
no, I totally get it.
Weeks here.
I had to try. But thinking about it, I think that point is well taken. That there's the data piece and there's the personalization piece. And we hear about it. I hear about from everybody I speak to in the industry, and even when you start to get outside of fitness and recovery, specifically, we have folks on the podcast who are into nutrition, and Dan Gluck from Power Plant Ventures, who talked about personalization. It's going to be about personalization in terms of what you need to eat and what dietary nutrients you need and how your body's getting them. Personalization from data, do you have a sense of how that plays out? And maybe it's not the company line, but personally, in terms of, we have all these things, and the idea is that in terms of tracking and wearables, even it's starting to become almost invisible, right? You want the Apple Watch or the Whoop, it's almost like it's not there, and then the data that they present to you is kind of like just enough to be actionable, and so that you can make those changes. But what does that ultimately mean in terms of improving performance or how things play out?
It's really interesting because we talk about that a lot, and I like, we have the company line and personally where I see things going and knowing what I know about the industry. There's a really interesting kind of case study that I like to point out. There's a company, you may have heard of them, Zeo.
Yeah.
Out of Massachusetts. They're no longer around, but 10, 12 years ago, whatever it was, they started off as a sleep tracking company. And the technology that was available, they were just pretty cutting edge back then, was this headband that you would wear, would connect to a device by your bedside, and it would kind of understand, where you're at with REM and everything else. We're able now, just in the last decade, it's gone so quickly to understand everything that's in your watch. And there's so much stuff that's now getting thrown into, like you said, an invisible kind of collector of information. So I think that as those continue to get more and more invisible and more robust in terms of the data that they can collect, and then on the back end, the various algorithms, and it's one of the things I know, Whoop is really known for, and their killer at is really understanding how to slice and dice that information in a way that presents it to you with actionable kind of next steps. One, it's going to inform kind of routines, and two, being able to take that information in the moment and being able to react to it and saying, you know what, I have to hit the pause button right now, not actually go out and do this workout, even though I might be physically feeling good, my body is telling me something else, or I need to up my recovery, or I need to be able to, dial in more efficient and more direct protocols with my Hypervolt, or, with my NormaTec boots, and being able to put that stuff together in a way that is kind of actionable, but easy to understand and easy to implement, because we're not inventing more hours in the day. I wish we were. What we're doing is we're giving people the tools to be able to utilize really effective means of recovery and hopefully do it in a way that you can implement into your existing busy routine. I mean, we're multitasking. We're really triple tasking at this point. Multitasking was putting on your makeup and driving, to work in the morning, or drinking your cup of coffee and driving. What we're doing now is, typical NormaTec session is, you'll sit there on the couch in your boots with a laptop while you're watching ESPN and catching up, right? You might even be on the phone at this moment too, while you're also firing off emails. So we're kind of trying to pack so much stuff in. And I think the holy grail from that perspective is to have even more data being captured, more understanding of what to do with that data, and then actionable next steps based on that data that's going to be able to really customize and curate that, personalized experience that not only everyone wants, but really ultimately as humans we need.
Yeah, I think you captured it really well. It was something that Will told me when we talked, was that, basically they're trying to build something that is better than your intuition alone. That like, you're going to get it wrong in terms of, should I work out? Should I not? Should I take the day off? How hard should I go? So if we can just remove that from the equation and just tell you, it's like we're solving a huge problem. So I think that you spoke to that point. And another part that I wanted to get to, would kind of be remiss if we didn't mention it, especially given your focus on performance and sports. We're recording this kind of in the midst of the COVID-19 outbreak. There are no sports. I think we're 50 plus days into things kind of being
crazy,
shut
man.
down.
Crazy.
What has that impact been, and what does that mean now and going forward?
From what perspective? From a pro sports perspective, in terms of,
yeah, and just to clarify, I think in this case specifically, working with so many athletes and so many teams, how has it impacted the business? And I can only imagine you guys are pulling out all the stops, getting to folks at home, shipping product, trying to coordinate all this stuff.
Sure. Well, it's multi-layered and it's constantly evolving, and we think we've struck a really nice balance. We worked very early on. I think we had some really great minds at the company, both Hyperice East and West, that came together and said, let's put in this plan of attack just in case, right? And this is going back to early March time, before things really got locked down from that perspective, and even before the NBA, I think officially shuttered. And it's multifaceted. So one is that there obviously is a huge shift, which makes a ton of sense, to at-home fitness. And I think that Hyperice is really well positioned with our product line. The fact that you can use it in the comfort of your own home. The pricing is very accessible, especially with anyone that is thinking about it. We have lots of payment plans and everything else. So just removing that price barrier is just something that was really important to kind of do. And a lot of the collaboration with some of our partners, for example, the Equinoxes and the Orange Theory Fitnesses and the Barry's Boot Camp, with Equinox pushing out classes on recovery and deals on products and everything kind of in between, has been really great. What's interesting too is, people love doing podcasts. So we have Hyperice Labs that we've been building up, just went live, I think, this past week. And one of the first guests that I interviewed was Dominic and Sue, right, of the Tampa Bay Bucks. There's no days off for these guys. They're still getting after it. They don't know if it's going to subside, if they're going to be playing without fans. They, in addition to that, even if there is no season, right, basketball or football related, they still have to stay in shape. You can't just take a year off or even a month off when you're this kind of a thoroughbred of a pro athlete of a machine. So they're constantly figuring out what I can be doing, and we're seeing a lot of teams picking up NormaTec's and Hyperice products across the board for the entire roster. I can't give out names. We're not big on giving out customer names unless we have official agreements and stuff. But we've had a couple of NBA teams reach out in the last week or so, just saying, "Hey, we got to make sure that our guys are dialed in. Give us a quote for Hyperice Hypervolt and a NormaTec Pulse Pro system for every guy on the squad." And just shipping those out and making sure that they're completely dialed in. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. But I know from the pros perspective, there are no days off, and they're still getting after it. Like, they might be going back to camp anytime soon.
Yeah, it's really unpredictable, and just keeping things moving here as we wrap up. One thing I wanted to touch on as well. Anything, I know you were kind of big on the secrets and not being able to divulge too much. Anything folks should be on the lookout for, keep an eye out for, as whether it's kind of the return to normal or other innovative products you guys have dropping at NormaTec and Hyperice.
For sure. Well, I mean, the first point is that, we are constantly innovating and working on stuff. The NormaTec product line has been the best it's ever been. We just dropped the new Pulse Series 2.0 in the last 12 months, worked out all the kinks, and it's just been a phenomenal, biggest seller for us by far. And then with really the great folks at Hyperice West, being able to utilize some of the really great, robust manufacturing solutions and partners that they have, we've been able to pretty quickly lower some of the core costs of some of the both raw materials and finished goods, and are passing that along to the customer. So where a week ago or 2 weeks ago, NormaTec machine and two boots, $12.95, making it much more accessible at $9.95 right now is just been a huge thing, and we've been seeing a huge uptick from a sales perspective, and we're really kind of pumped about that. The other thing, and again, can't go into too many details here, but the concept of really dialing in from a digital tech side of life, giving people more access to whether it's protocols or understanding what's going on and how to better utilize the product is something that we're really big on. And we see that the best in the business, it's a great way to not only interface with your customer, but also allow them to get the most out of the product after the purchase. And that's something that we're really big on. So we're constantly innovating. So I will say that, over the next period of time, the goal of revolutionizing the digital tech side is something that we're super amped about. And we have plans to be dropping something sooner than later.
That's awesome. We'll definitely be on the lookout, and appreciate you making time today to chat. Excited to share this with everybody, and just tell them where they can go to learn more.
Awesome, man. So from a Hyperice.com perspective, obviously on social at Hyperice, at NT Recovery for NormaTec, NormaTecRecovery.com. Pretty easy, kind of Google it. Everyone has access, and we have a really great customer experience team that not only will take care of sales, but any questions that you have, call up, tell us who you are. I love connecting with the customer. It's one of the things that's just really my passion. I geek out on cool designs, but I'm all about connecting with the customer, and you never know who you're talking to. And even when there's a customer service challenge or the product that's not working the way that the customer thinks it should, or something needs to be swapped out, which does happen from time to time, but only occasionally. Being able to connect with the customer has been something that I think both companies historically and now as one, we've really hung our hats on. And a great quick analogy that I have here, a little story from back in the day, is one of the first shows we ever went to was the Boston Marathon from a NormaTec perspective. And lots of people are coming through those expos, right? You have some people that look super fit. You have some people that aren't super fit that are still running the race. And then some people that just stumbled in there and looking for, free samples of Power Bar or something like that. And this gal comes over, and she looks like she's in her, early 20s, mid 20s with her girlfriend, and clearly nothing to do with running whatsoever. And she's looking, she's spending time, and this is early on. She goes, this could be cool. My brother plays football. So I'm thinking okay, he plays linebacker for the local high school or whatever it is. And she starts taking more and more of my time. And I go, who is he? What's the deal? He goes, oh, he plays for the New York Giants. And, called him up and bought two on the spot right there. So you never know who you're talking to. So I get super geeked out from that perspective. So we always love connecting and understanding, who you are and what background you come from.
Perfect. We'll get this out there. Let folks get in touch. And again, just appreciate you making time. Excited to share the conversation.
Joe, great questions, and really appreciate the opportunity today. Thanks so much.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. For more from Fit Insider, visit insider.fit.co and subscribe to our weekly newsletter for insights and analysis on the business of fitness and wellness. Then go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. See you next time.